All of us use laptops and smartphones now. Is there room for a third category of device in the middle? And we think we got the goods. We think we've done it, and we call it the iPad.
So what else can we do to help customers find even more uses for iPad, to use it in places they never imagined, in manners they never have before? This is iPad mini. We want it to be smaller such that it could be thinner and lighter, as you can see, but not so small that it stops being incredibly usable, because the iPad is the most usable of all these devices.
So we asked ourselves, how could we take iPad even further? Today, we have the biggest news in iPad since the iPad. This is the iPad Pro.
It has a huge screen, the biggest we've ever built in an iOS device. It has more power and performance than any iOS device we've ever made either. And it's going to enable new classes of applications for iPad.
We're announcing an all-new iPad Pro. It's going to push what you can do on iPad or on any computer even further. This is the new iPad Pro.
It marks the biggest change since the original iPad, and we have made it better in every possible way. In fact, this really is the iPad we dreamed about building from the very beginning.
Over the years, we've pushed the limits of how portable, powerful, and versatile iPad can be, and some want to do even more with it. So this year, we're continuing to push the capabilities of iPadOS even further. Wow, more windows and a menu bar? Who would have thought? We've truly pulled off a mind-blowing release on iPad.
Well, after about 2 to 3 weeks of playing around with the iPadOS 26 update, the developer preview or beta at this point, of course, I'm going to go as far to say that it completely reinvents the iPad as a product. And that's a pretty bold statement to make, but this has happened. It just doesn't happen that often. And of course, it started out with the original iPad I have on the left here that was first debuted or literally invented in 2010 and really fleshed out the concept of what a modern touch-based tablet computer is, and is literally the grandfather of all tablets, including Android ones that soon followed. Then a little over 2 years later, we got the iPad mini, which quite simply, but also profoundly reimagined or reinvented the iPad concept, just smaller, and has been a cult classic since then. However, 5 years into the iPad's existence as a product, they finally decided to make it much bigger, more powerful, and for the first time gave it a stylus, launching the first-gen Apple Pencil alongside the smart keyboard that attached via a magnetic connector that was found on the side of the, you guessed it, first-generation iPad Pro 12.9-inch. In short, Apple clearly expanded iPad's usage case beyond more casual or purely lighter weight productivity-based tasks. They don't just add Pro in their product names for no reason. Then we entered what I would call the, hopefully, first golden age or renaissance of the iPad, which started in late 2018 when they unveiled the, at its time, insanely ambitious first-gen iPad Pro 11-inch and the third-gen 12.9-inch, which adopted the iPhone X style display and navigation minus the notch, a sexy, more industrial design, USB-C, the second-gen Apple Pencil, which was miles better than the first-gen that brought wildly convenient magnetic attachment and wireless charging. And finally, these models were given a super powerful ARM Apple A12X chip that outperformed the hot and efficient Intel chips and MacBook Pros of its day. Really exciting hardware that laid the foundation for the future M chips and the entire Apple Silicon transition. But the whole ensemble ran iOS 12 and felt a little limited, which was unfortunately a bit of foreshadowing for the years to come. However, like clockwork, the refreshed iPad Pros along with iPads of the time received a groundbreaking update in mid-2019 with the newly named and distinctive iPadOS version 13, which for the first time was starkly different from the iPhone's operating system, iOS 13, that launched alongside it. In other words, the iPad was no longer to be treated like just a big iPhone and received some exclusive features like enhanced multitasking, a better optimized home screen layout with early widgets, and more. This was a super special time for me because if you remember, I was super excited, so much so I posted a very successful channel-changing, career-beginning video detailing why this update made me literally go out and buy a 64 gig iPad Pro 11-inch with all the nickels and dimes I could scrape together when I was 18 and just starting college. And the rest is history. Things were really looking up. People, including myself, were again just stoked and feeling like we were living in the future. But as some of us Apple enthusiasts and creators know well at this point, the M1 Max came out and the iPad evolution began to stall and pretty much stop over the next 6 years, which was just really depressing and disappointing. Sure, we got trackpad support in 2020 with iPadOS 14 and the Magic Keyboard case in 2021, which were nice, but these additions ultimately didn't change the whole experience too much since iPadOS 13 and later iPadOS 14 still felt a bit clunky compared to macOS. Then iPad Pro got the M1 chip, which really had us thinking that WWDC 2021 and iPadOS 15 were going to bring huge Mac-like updates that would take advantage of all that power, which of course never came to pass, left us feeling really confused and very disappointed. But then the following year, we got Stage Manager and external monitor support. These features were a nice nod to iPad enthusiasts, but again, they didn't ultimately fix the problems a lot of us had with the OS that was undercooked and undercapable compared to its Mac counterpart. And while we did get absolutely superb iPad hardware last year with insanely thin and powerful M4 iPad Pro models, along with newer Magic Keyboards and fairly economical and practical iPad, iPad Air, and iPad mini models, iPadOS 17 and iPadOS 18 just weren't cutting it, especially the latter, which, to be honest, felt like a slap to the face and I figure was totally a product of Apple going all in on AI for WWDC 2024. At that point, I myself and a few other creators, and I'm sure some of you or many of you, gave up hope that the iPad would be anything more than a tablet that pretends it doesn't run a special version of iOS. But then WWDC 2025 arrived and changed everything we thought we knew about iPad in the best way possible. It also happened to be the first time I got invited out to Apple's California HQ, otherwise known as Apple Park, which was really super special. I'll share my experience about that soon because I captured a lot of footage during my time there. But anyway, and with that history lesson recap out of the way, which I think is important to include here for you because it helps you understand like what kind of a journey iPad users have gone on and also Apple to get to this point to appreciate the, what I would argue are groundbreaking new features that we're gonna demo next. And mind you, this is a developer preview, you know, it's not even the public beta yet, so things are unfinished, so I'm not gonna take a really in-depth look, but I can at least show you sort of the basic mechanics of these new features and why they're so important. But before we get into that, because I don't want to interrupt that, you know, demo flow state, I want to quickly tell you how I've been keeping this iPad charged and so many other iPads and devices charged around my office or studio here, and tell you or bring you a message from the people that made today's video possible, Anker, and their Prime 250 watt 6-port charger along with their 240 watt braided cable here. First up, and again, the charger has been a godsend as I've been testing and charging a dozen different devices for my recent coverage here at the office or studio. It lives amid my productivity desk setup and when not in use acts like a clock with its real-time interactive display that's slightly angled for easier viewing at my desk, which I really enjoy. But when in use, it's an absolute powerhouse, no pun intended, with one 140 watt and three 100 watt capable USB-C ports out front and two USB-A ports on its side that really offer a lot of connectivity and variety. It also has this intuitive built-in dial, which can give you more insight about each port's output and access to onboard toggles and settings. Lastly, you can manage the charger via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi with the Anker app, where you can also further customize the display with different fun clocks or screensavers, which again is a really nice touch. Then we have their braided cable here, which I'll go over quickly. As simple as it may be on the surface, it's quite an insane piece of tech. For starters, it has a 100-year bend durability rating and can cope with 220 pounds of strain, so I could technically use this as a rope and it would still work. But probably more practically, it can endure extreme temperatures between -40 and 176 degrees Fahrenheit and can accommodate 240 watts of power throughput, which in theory can charge a MacBook Pro 16-inch to 50% in just 26 minutes. All in all though, these are two really sick charging accessories that again, I found super useful while charging the 14.5 devices I got scattered around me during all this Apple software beta testing. I'll leave links below if you're interested in checking either of these products out. Alright, so with that history recap out of the way once again, which I hope you found insightful, because it's important to understand how far the iPad has come over the years, and as I said at the beginning, how many times it's been reinvented, which, was only a handful of times, even though we got the M1 chip and Stage Manager and all that. Those were, evolutions, the Mini, the Pro, the later Pro, and then this. These are major, major changes that I would, again, argue reinvent the iPad as a product. So I'm going to do my best to sort of articulate why I think these new features are so groundbreaking. And again, this is a developer beta. The public beta is going to be coming out soon, so definitely upgrade to that if you're feeling brave. It's going to be more stable. But this, is still sort of in the works, so there may be a few things that don't work right. So this is by all means not representative of what the public beta and the final version will be like in the fall. So anyway, let's get started here, and I'm going to be referencing my iPad mini because doing this is just there's too much going on. I'm overstimulated. I have to look here, look here, look here. It's a nightmare, so bear with me. I have put this off for days. I'm literally wearing something different, and I have my AC on. Hopefully I got voice isolation going on because
I can't turn that off, otherwise I will actually die during this process, so.
Let's get started, shall we? First up, let's talk about the windowing mode. So for years, iPad was really just a full screen experience. Even in later versions where you could have a split view, you really couldn't do much with it. Then iPadOS 16 came out, and all of a sudden you could have resizable windows, but they were really sort of like herky-jerky, and you really couldn't do much. Now you can move them wherever you want and resize them however you want. Not like exactly like you can in macOS, which is the point, because they want to keep this experience more iPad-like, more locked down in a way. But it's so much more fluid and wonderful, and it doesn't feel like half-baked like it did, from iPadOS 16 to iPadOS 17 to 18. So you can have multiple windows out too, stacked on top of each other. It really is a pleasant experience. You can move them around here. Again, very much like a Mac, but in a very iPad way, which is of course I can't get it to move, demos. This is, again, a very iPad-like experience, but with a Mac twist to it, so to speak. And we'll talk about that later and sort of the Apple executive's opinion on this, specifically Craig Federighi, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, I am really enjoying this. It works really, really well. What else do I have in my notes here? Oh, of course, the controls. So this is another thing that is major. Apple decided to bring this Mac-like stoplight control to iPad. So it doesn't quite sort of show up the same way it does on Mac, where it's sort of fully scaled. You have to tap on it, but it's the same sort of concept here. You can close an app by pressing the X, which I'm not going to do. You can minimize it by pressing the minimize button, so that'll send it back to Stage Manager or back to your dock or whatever. And then you can press the, as you saw earlier, the full screen green button to make it go full screen. So that's really sick. And of course you can sort of go back into windowed mode by dragging from the corner, or you can also do it again with this button here. So really wonderful, but it gets even better if you hold down on this green button. You get the Mac-like window control resizing, whatever this is, fill and arrange, move, resize. I could have just read that, but I had to ad lib. Anyway, you can really control your windows in such an amazing way, and I love this feature with my Mac. That's one of the reasons why I default to using a Mac. But now, since I have this here, I'm really sort of encouraged to use my iPad more in the ways that I would use my Mac, but with the benefit of, again, having that iPad-like experience. So I can, for example, bring in 4 windows here, and I can show you something really, really sick. You can actually arrange 4 windows in a sort of quad setup here, like so, just like that, and also resize them as well, in a sort of uneven way. You can also do a triple view too, so let's try that. Hold on, y'all. I need to get my windows back here. 1, 2, 3. We got 3 windows. All right, let's go back to that sort of arrange menu here. So instead of doing the quad thing, we can click a triple view, and now you get these beautiful sort of tall windows here, which really look great on the iPad Pro or iPad Air 13-inch. And of course, you can resize them the way you want as well, so you can have a bigger central one. So love that. Very fluid. The same kind of resizing is happening here as well. And then you can just have, you know, your typical 2 window setup as well, which I like. So let's do that real quick here. I do this a lot on my Mac. So yeah, super easy. You still get split view. You still get, oh my God. Can we, stop, 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 stop. So just like old times, you still get split view. It's even better, it's even more fluid. But then again, you can also do that quad view or that triple view, which is very refreshing as well, and takes advantage of this new window mechanic, which I'm really in love with here. But that's not all. There's also this new flicking mechanic where you can flick your windows from side to side to get them to adhere into those modes without having to go into that green button menu, so to speak, the resize arrange menu. You can also flick a window up to make it go full screen, which is really nice too. So I'm a huge fan of that. It feels great to just be able to do that. And you can also do it with just one app too. So I can just go like that and it adheres, and then I can bring another app in here too and have that whichever way. So it doesn't automatically assume that you want to do a split screen, but you can then also just go like that and it'll do it. Or you can use that again, green, light, resize, arrange menu to adhere your window like that. So there's many ways to make your windows, you know, appear the way you want them to, move around, all of that. So you can have them in your typical split view mode. You can have them sort of stacked on top of each other. You can actually move them around without them feeling like they're very limited. So again, they weren't kidding when they said they rebuilt this from the ground up to work even better. And I'm so happy they did that. So this is, you know, reinventing the iPad in that it really does operate like a Mac window-wise, but with an iPad twist, with that iPad feel. So they really perfectly blended the 2 OSs here in a way that, you know, again, keeps the iPad distinct, but also brings a really important fluid feature you get with Mac OS or a more typical desktop OS. And I love it so far. I could not have conceptualized it like this, you know, like I sort of trusted them to do this the right way, and they certainly did, because again, the stage manager window stuff that was happening, iPadOS 16, iPadOS 18, just didn't feel quite right. So I feel like they learned, you know, from their mistakes and also took the best stuff from the Mac and gave us a really amazing new windowing experience here. And I thought that was all I had to say about windowing, but we got 2 more things that I just saw in my notes. Another thing that's really cool is if you tap your home screen, it'll bring you right back to sort of regular iPad mode. So you can just sort of use your home screen, your widgets, your apps, whatever, and then get right back into the windowed view. So you can get the mess out of the way, bring it back real quick. And finally, I noticed that this whole mode lives in the Stage Manager menu, if that makes sense. So if I turn off Stage Manager, it just brings me right back into full screen iPad land. I don't even think you can like multi-window or task or whatever. Let's try that real quick. I'm gonna try to open Spotify over here. Nope, can't do it. So you can get right back into that typical 1 app per screen iPad mode. You know, nothing's going on. I can't get that little control stoplight thing. It's just, you know, regular iPad land, which I think Craig said in the keynote, like, you know, some people want the simplicity while other people want to be able to sort of dive in and do crazy stuff. And again, I just turn that right back on and I'm right back into windowed mode and Stage Manager. So it's a good way to compartmentalize your experiences. I wish that you could do split screen here because I think that's sort of a basic iPad mode, but maybe they just want to sort of keep the situations or the experiences separate. But anyway, I'm just happy that this mode exists because it is really, really great, and I can't wait to see how it evolves more with future updates. But anyway, enough about windowing for now, although I'm sure I'll bring it up where it makes sense in the rest of this demo here. Next up, I want to talk about another feature that I think really reinvents the iPad as a product, and that is the addition of the menu bar, which has been a macOS specific feature since the dawn of time, since macOS, you know, 9 or 8 or whatever. You know, it's been there since I think the 80s, but you know, more so in this form since 2000 with the introduction of macOS 10. This has been absent from the iPad since its inception, and I think this is a feature that a lot of us have wanted for a while, especially as the iPad became more and more advanced. And I'm so happy Apple implemented it the way that they did. sort of not front and center, sort of tucked away, but right there where you need it. And I think it also really takes advantage of cursor use with the Magic Keyboard, and also when you're using an external monitor, which also takes advantage of the new windowing mode, by the way. I forgot to say that. So the external monitor situation has gotten a whole lot better because, again, of the new revamped windowing and the fact that you get functions here that you can toggle just like you can on a Mac, but out of the way, you know, in a very refined way. And also you can see here Apple Pencil Hover is really great for this. You can sort of hover over the options and, you know, just, it's great. It's really refreshing. It makes me want to use my iPad over my Mac just because it feels different but still has the same functionality. So it's great in Safari here, but I think it's even better in apps like Pages if I can find it. And with some editing magic and a few explicatives later, I got Pages open here for you for this demo. So let's get the menu bar going here. So we got Pages, we got File, Edit, Insert. We also got View, where I can also go into full screen. So I can flick the window, I can go to the controls here, which also interact nicely with Apple Pencil Hover. But I can also go to Window and then enter full screen, which is 6. So not only do you get to control the app, you also get to control the way it, you know, appears, just like you can do on a Mac. So anyway, let's explore some more here. Print, open document, edit, undo is up here as well, insert. So I'm not gonna like demo this right now, although I can also resize it here, which is cool. So resize. Okay, so you can also access that, you know, window control feature from here too, which is wonderful. Anyway, love the fact that we get controls in here that, of course, you can interact with your cursor, whether you're using, or if you're using the Magic Keyboard or an external monitor, and also here with the Apple Pencil. It also works with your finger decently. It's a little more awkward, but still pretty great. But yeah, it's definitely a better experience with the pencil and with a cursor or a keyboard or a mouse or whatever. But yeah, it's still very usable when you are just using your finger here to touch the screen. I also think it works great in apps like Files, where you need to navigate through your folders here. So I have 2 windows open here, and I have one where the menu is sort of tucked away here just for the sake of screen real estate. So if I want to go back here, I don't have a back option, even though I think it should be right here. But, you know, for the time being, I can bring the menu down, go to Go, and then click back, and then I'm back. And I can also go forward. So that's, you know, function or control that you otherwise didn't have before. You were sort of beholden to the iPad UI, which is great for touch and all that. But when you're using a mouse or a keyboard or whatever, you know, you can not only use keyboard shortcuts, which are also listed here in the menu bar as well. So it literally gives you the keyboard shortcut, which is wonderful. But you also, of course, can just go to the menu bar itself and go back and forward, which is, again, just phenomenal. Like, it's little things like that that really make the menu bar make sense on iPad. And what's really interesting is that the menu bar works with apps that you really wouldn't expect, like a system app like Camera. So it appears that any app can have this functionality or will have the menu bar pop up. It just depends on if the developer or Apple gives it a lot of functions. But Camera here absolutely does. You can go to Camera settings. If you click Camera, you can, of course, go full screen with the window mode. But if you go to Format, you can flip the camera, which is really interesting. And then if you go to View, you can change the modes from video to photo to portrait. So that is so fascinating. I think you can also literally take a picture. Oh yeah, so you can start recording with File. If you switch back to photo mode, you can literally capture a photo with the capture button in the File dropdown. So that is fascinating. It's very weird, but I'm happy that all apps seem to get menu bar functionality. So we get to see the menu bar, you know, mixed with or fused with apps we never would have expected to interact, if that makes sense. But even more importantly, I would argue, is the menu bar's, you know, implementation with apps that really need it, like Final Cut Pro, which at the moment really doesn't have any functionality built in yet, because I think they're working on an update for later in the fall or the summer or whatever. I'll put a little title here to clarify if I have any information, but it's not here yet. But apps like this, where there's just so many functions and things you have to do, you literally need a menu bar for that kind of nuanced control, which we just really didn't have with previous versions of iPadOS. So, you know, we no longer have to just rely on touch-based interactions like the jog wheel here or whatever, you know, that make it a little more clunky. We can now, or Apple can now, introduce more features that are baked in that don't necessarily have to have a UI toggle, because, you know, they don't have that on the Mac. You just go to the menu and you click the option, or you do a, you know, keyboard shortcut here. But I'm so glad that the menu bar sort of brings the best of the Mac while again also sort of preserving, or not just sort of, very much preserving the magic of the iPad, where you can just pick it up like this and, you know, touch it with your fingers here and interact with it. That's a huge, you know, sort of, as Craig Federighi puts it, it's a sort of mental contract you have with the device. And again, I keep bringing up him because there's a whole interview portion that I go over later in the video where he answers so many questions as to why, you know, they took so long to implement a feature like this. But anyway, really fascinating stuff. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, so far I am really thrilled with the menu bar and the way it has been implemented. Again, you know, it brings the best of the Mac and the nuanced control there and just sort of, you know, functionality beyond what your iPhone can do, and of course previous versions of iPadOS, while also preserving this very iPad-like experience, which we all know and love so much. And like clockwork, I gotta stop myself from yapping about the feature at hand here, which is the menu bar at the moment. So we can move on and talk about a few more important features with this update. But just to re-emphasize the hypothesis of this video, you know, the whole main point, the big claim that I'm making here. So far, I would say the menu bar and the new windowing mode here really reinvent the iPad. Because again, these were features or functions, basic functions adapted from the Mac to the iPad, keeping the iPad experience the way it is, but bringing that functionality. So I hope that that makes sense here, why I think that these features, these basic functions really change the iPad fundamentally in a way we've never seen yet. Even, you know, comparing it to iPadOS 13, you know, that brought more function, but this is just to a whole other level while again retaining the iPad experience. Next up though, let's talk about some new features with files in general. So I pray to God this is a new feature. I'm pretty sure. I can't double check now, so feel free to correct me. But we now get column view, which is wonderful. So you can sort of see the breakdown of your folders in a more nuanced way. Also, too, I'm having a flashback to how big the file icons were in previous versions. So I'm so thankful that since hopefully, I don't know, like last version or a few versions, the folder icons are like smaller. Anyway, they used to be so huge. I'm like just remembering that for some reason. So we've come a long way here. Let me refer to my notes so I'm staying on track. Oh yes, this is one of my favorite new features here. It isn't as fundamental as like a menu bar or, you know, windowing, but it's such a Mac-like feature that's so exciting. So now you can add folders to your dock here. If you hold down, for example, I'm sure there's a menu bar option too. You can add to your dock. I've already done that with downloads here. So if you tap that, it unfolds or fans just like it would on the Mac, although on a Mac, I think you can have like a whole like box view, but this is the view that you get here. Maybe they'll change it in the future, but I absolutely love it. And it's huge for doing stuff like this. So I can go to Safari here and, you know, judge me, I use the Gmail client in Safari. I don't like the Gmail app. You know, I use it on my Mac like this and also my iPad as well. And I'm often dragging files and PDFs and pictures and stuff. So if I have something in my downloads, all I have to do is drag it to the window here, drag and drop, and boom. That was something you couldn't do for a while, you know, as easily. But now, without even having to have a files window open, without having to open it, you know, from the little paper clip, you can just quickly access a folder or downloads or whatever and have that here. I can also copy in like a PDF as well, so let's do that. So we'll copy in like a document, for example. I'm often doing that. Super duper easy, attached, boom. Love that. This is like huge for me, honestly, because I like dragging and dropping files like that on my Mac, and that was something that I wanted to do on my iPad for such a long time, and it sort of kept me from, you know, defaulting or at least using my iPad for some things. So, you know, answering my email in this lame, you know, in Safari Gmail kind of way, I'm like disappointing the mail users, you know, the Apple Mail users. I'm disappointing the people that, you know, have their own client, whatever. Completely judge me, I don't care. But this feature really makes this, you know, experience or just dragging and dropping files in general so much better. Okay, so maybe this is more of a normal usage case. We got the Notes app here. I can drag a picture in like so. I'm also doing this for another feature, which I'm gonna demo later. Maybe you can guess it as I'm scrolling through the app. You can also drag in a PDF, like a presentation. So again, love this. It's very Mac-like, but also very iPad-like at the same time. And it takes advantage of the, you know, very expansive dock that you have here. So beyond, you know, the Files app, you sort of get an extension of it with these collapsible, you know, accessible folders on your dock. So love this feature, 10 out of 10 in terms of functionality and execution in my book. We also got one more thing with Files real quick, and it's actually pretty huge. We get preview functionality and preview itself in iPadOS now. So we can do quick looks at things here with the whole preview app. So you can actually like mark it up and edit stuff, whether it's a PDF like this or if it's a picture like this. So you get proper Mac-like quick look, you know, without sort of watered down iPadOS functionality from before. And there's also now a preview app, which is so exciting. And let's go full screen for this. That's probably for the best. Also, intrusive thought. I don't know why we got to have preview so big in text here. Maybe they just want to make sure people know what this is. So it's sort of a UI choice, but hopefully they sort of get rid of that, because I think it's awkward. But like otherwise, it's a wonderful app because just like on your Mac, it's a subset of your Files app, or more so here than there. Preview is sort of its own thing that just gets triggered when you click on or open a PDF or a picture. Here, it sort of combines, you know, the functionality and also the Files app, which is unique to the iPad, which I love. But yeah, you can really dive into your PDFs here, you know, to mark them up. So for example, here is a tax document. Oops, I went windowed mode. Maybe we could just continue there. Why not? So I can, you know, mark up this tax document here. I was praying to God my name wasn't going to show up, because I actually, in a previous demo on a different day when I gave up, like my whole address popped up on here, so that was great. So let me do some markup here. Oh, so the eraser has been chosen. So let's bring up that quick menu here and click that. So there you go. We can, you know, do that. I can't write words right now. I'm really focused on just staying on task. But anyway, you can mark stuff up just like in Notes. You can export, you can crop, you can rotate, stuff like that. That's even more apparent when you are dealing with pictures here. So I have a picture of my cat. Let's go back into full screen. And I can rotate stuff here, you know, without being in the Photos app here. Obviously, the Photos app is a bit better for editing photos, but it's so nice that you get to do it here. You can also resize or crop or whatever. I'm not going to do that, but, you know, just like on your Mac. And something else that's cool is that you can export, you know, your stuff here normally like you would with AirDrop and to people that you know and whatever. But now you can export in a way where you have a lot more control over the format and also the size, which you know, dictates how big the file is. So, you know, at its biggest, this file is 3.6 megabytes. But what if you need to, you know, input or add a photo to like a portal online or some government document, and they're like, we don't want it more than 1 megabyte. Well, you can change that now here. So you get finer control if you need it, but also that more basic, you know, export menu here that also just looks wonderful when you toggle it with liquid glass, which we'll talk about soon. But yeah, love the preview app. I will definitely dive more into the functionality here in a future, you know, video or day in the life or review or whatever. But that's a basic look at preview. It's a huge deal again because it brings Mac-like functionality, but also combines it with the Files app, which I really, really love. Something else I love is another basic Mac function that has been taken over and implemented into iPadOS, and that is something called background tasks, or in other words, you know, it's a feature that lets your apps sort of do their thing in the background, even if you don't have them open. I thought this was fixed in previous versions, but apparently this is a new feature, but it's huge nonetheless, you know, kind of, you know, bare bones, sort of low-hanging fruit, but I'm really happy it's here nonetheless. And for now, there's 2 ways to demo it best. There's a live activity that sort of shows what's going on, and you can see it best as of right now in the Files app. So I'm going to drag some footage that I have on an SD card here into a folder in my files called Movie Imports. So I'm going to do that, and if I get out of that, as you can see here, you can see a live activity of how this is going. In previous versions, I don't think you would get that. And also, too, if you just miss this, it'll show up, I think, right here. Yep, so you can see something going on. And I think if you tap on that, it brings it back up. So I'm going to stop that because I don't want all this footage imported on here. I just wanted to show the live activity. The reason I did the file transfer here is because an app like Final Cut Pro, which is, you know, probably the best, you know, example of this, it doesn't allow you to do it yet because you need to have a future update that's not here yet. So in theory, you get a similar live activity if you were exporting a video or like rendering it. So you could exit the app and it would continue doing that. However, there is an app that lets you do it for now, and it is LumaFusion. So let's open that up here, and I have a project that's, you know, some iPhone footage, but something that would take a minute to export. So let's export that, shall we? Let's go here. Let's go to Movie and export that to Photos, and also make sure it's like compressed, so it's like really hard to render. So let's do that, and we're gonna click Share, and it's going to do that. So I can exit here, so it's at 6 seconds or whatever. Let's get out of here. wait a minute, whatever, la 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 la, we're just using the iPad, great. You can go back in and it's still at it. It didn't, stop. So the feature is already being taken advantage of by an app. Even though there is no live activity, the API or whatever is still being used here. So that's super exciting. So I'm not a big fan of LumaFusion anymore. I mean, it's great if you, like it. I prefer Final Cut Pro since I use that on my Mac. But again, now we get to actually use the Apple Silicon in here and not sort of baby it down and sort of, not put it to its full use, you know what I mean? Because like if a MacBook Air with the same chip can render something in the background within macOS, there was no reason that an iPad couldn't do the same. So even though it's basic, I'm glad we can actually, do more things in the background with iPad. And I wouldn't say that reinvents the iPad, but it's certainly a very important Mac feature that needed to be here for a while, again, to take advantage of the Mac chips that are in here. Like literally, the M4 is the same M4 that you can find in the base MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. So again, there's no excuse. I'm so glad that they implemented this feature, again, even though it's sort of low-hanging fruit. And finally, we get to my favorite portion of this demo because A, I'm super passionate about it, and B, it doesn't take every performance core, every fiber of my being or brain cell to lock in and look at you and look at the camera and do the right motions and show off the right features and all the details. It's been an ADHD person's nightmare, this whole demo here, but you know what isn't? Talking about design. I absolutely love the new liquid glass redesign. We haven't seen anything like this since 2013 and 2014 with the iOS 7 redesign and the macOS Yosemite redesign that was championed by Johnny Ives that flattened everything out. Well, we still get that look here, but with a more material and arguably skeuomorphic look. So first up, we see it on the lock screen here with these giant numbers that I have for the clock. I customized that, love it. You also see it happening with this notification here and options, also the control center here, and buttons as well, which I can demo here if I don't let Face ID do its thing. So here we go. Love the way these buttons look here. So here's the home screen. Again, we get the control center, which looks wonderful. The apps are looking delicious. You can also have them in a more default look as well. So, that's nice, but I love the new clear look, especially darkened as well. So that's the look that I'm going for, but I'm sure you've seen translucent icons, which look great in macOS and iOS and all that. So loving the look here once again. Also the way the notification or lock screen panel sort of glistens like a sort of sheet of glass. It's just gorgeous, and it brings back that skeuomorphic look without getting rid of Johnny Ives, really groundbreaking design, which I don't think anybody really wanted to go away entirely, but I will say it really does remind me, this update, of previous versions of iOS. So here's iOS 5 running on an iPad 3rd gen, a very weird product, 30-pin connector, underpowered chip. If you remember that the A5X was just powerful enough to push the first Retina display on an iPad. So this is a real important iPad in iPad history. But yeah, it just gives me that same vibe, like the glass in the icons and the dock here. So not exactly the same, but I will say, I have an iPhone 5 and an iPhone 16e here with the same backgrounds going on. I have to type in my password, oh my God. Okay, that's better. Anyway, the resemblance is there. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but as you can see, we get some of that skeuomorphism, realism back with the glass elements, again, without getting rid of Johnny Ives' monumental redesign work, which, again, we've loved, we want to keep around. If, they completely redesigned everything and made everything look different, it would feel unrecognizable, it'd feel gross. It kind of would feel like, the update did back in 2013, but, that was really purposeful. Obviously, they really thought about how they were going to do that, and it sort of matched the times, and the design has looked excellent since then, but we're bringing back some of that realism, some of that aqua, some of that translucency, transparency, and I absolutely love that here. It just makes the experience feel more fresh, more fluid. I mean, just beautiful. It makes it feel more, I don't know, like powerful, like you're taking advantage of the internals. I mean, they said, the most recent Apple Silicon can really, push, software material in a way they've never dreamed. Like older chips like the A6, we're never going to be able to do that, but they could give us that sort of, PNG picture-based, sort of static skeuomorphism. Now we get it in a way that, again, blends that flat design, but also the sort of aliveness or the liveliness of newer UI capabilities that can take advantage of the powerful GPUs in chips like the M4 and also the A18 and A18 Pro. But anyway, I cannot help but ogle at how the liquid glass elements interact with your content, like in music here. I think this might be the best example. It also does it in notes, which is super subtle, but really, really wonderful here. It really interacts with your content like physical glass would. It's not just like a Windows Vista Gaussian blur. Like this is, a physical software item, so to speak, like there's physics going on, whatever, with the way light is bent and all that. So your processor is doing that in the background, and it can because they're so powerful now. It's like, why not take advantage of them? The Games app also does this. There's so many beautiful colors happening here, so you can see how the liquid glass menu interacts with the different windows or sort of little apps or whatever that's going on here. And of course your control center panel and the lock screen panel and notifications, etc., etc. All in all, I am thrilled with this new facelift or redesign on top of all the other features, but in this case, the redesign, it just brings the best of old school Apple and the new Vision OS feel from Apple and brings it all together, and of course takes advantage of the hardware. So yeah, as a Apple nostalgia person, as someone who has seen the evolution over the years, I am so thrilled with this update. It brings, elements of the old and mixes it with the new in the best way possible, I think. And it's no surprise that it took this long for them to cook this up because, redesigns shouldn't happen just for the sake of a redesign like other companies do in a sort of non-tasteful way. This, however, chef's kiss, love it, and I'm sure it'll look even better as updates roll out and more feedback gets heard and implemented. Okay, so we've gone over the really crucial features here, of course not super in-depth. We're gonna do that later on once the public beta and later versions come out. But the next thing I want to discuss, or a rhetorical question I want to ask, is why did this take so long? Why did we sit here wondering if the iPad had a future for oh my gosh, 6 years? The whole history recap probably gave you some scale as to how long this journey has been. And indeed it was, and journey is the right word because it was used in a recent article written by MacStory's editor-in-chief and founder, Federico Viticii, a legend, a guy who has been, talking about the iPad, using the iPad since the early days. His really amazing backstory as to how he, got obsessed with the iPad. He's been doing this way longer than I have, and he got to interview Senior Vice President of Software, Craig Federighi, Air Force One himself, at Apple Park, and ask him really, really intimate questions about this journey as Craig describes it. So I have taken those quotes out of Federico's amazing article, which you should definitely read, and I have sort of categorized them into 3 categories. The first is about what the iPad is as a product, and I'm gonna read off my iPad, forgive me here, because I can't just memorize these, offhand. So Craig says, what is the essence of iPad? If the Mac didn't exist, how would they sort of, look at it? How would it operate if the Mac never existed at all? That's something they thought about. And he said, I think Apple would describe it, the iPad, as a magical piece of glass where you can hold your content in your hand, and our most versatile device where you can interact with that content in the greatest variety of ways. For me, I have, like you, an emotional attachment to my iPad. It is the source of connection, it is the source of learning. It becomes an extension of your own ability to think and solve problems. That's a little dramatic, but I love him and I love the energy and the passion. Anyway, it is the device that can manage to go with us into almost every nook and cranny of our existence. That range makes it an extension of self for some of us in a way that I think fosters emotional connection. I do agree with that. Anyway, he goes on to say, I think that is why for those of us that end up with this deep connection, it's natural we keep wanting to push it further, right? So that sort of sets things up here. He also says, I think we've been on a journey, of finding the right interface for iPad along with our users. And I think it actually has been important that it's been a considered journey. In other words, he's saying yeah, it took a long time and there's a reason for that. He also goes into detail about what the iPad isn't as a product. First up, he says iPad is the best touch computer and the Mac is the best keyboard and mouse computer, of course in Apple's opinion, but I would also agree. He also says you have to start with the grounding that iPad is a direct manipulation, touch-first device. It is a foundational requirement that if you touch the screen to move something, that it responds. Otherwise, the entire interaction model is broken. It's a psychic break with your contract with the device. Now that may sound like some Apple marketing jargon, overly passionate, hyperbolic, whatever, but it makes a ton of sense because again, Apple created the tablet. Let's just be real. They didn't create the tablet computer, but they created the modern multi-touch interface tablet that's touch first. And they've created this mental contract that we have with the iPad, that has sort of this expectation that it operates the way that it does. So if they were to, put in an operating system or an update that felt like it was better suited for use with a keyboard and a mouse or a cursor, the Mac is the best, keyboard and mouse computer, like they said, it would break that contract in your head, that expectation that we've had for the past 15 years about how an iPad is supposed to work, with your fingers primarily or touch. So, they don't want to sort of change the iPad so fundamentally that it no longer feels like an iPad, breaking that contract or giving you that psychic break. So they want to keep the iPad, and they don't want to deviate from the original vision. So I really, really admire that. Craig also continues, he tells Federico this because he lives in Italy. He says, I don't know if you have sporks in Italy. Someone said, if a spoon's great, a fork's great, then let's combine them into a single utensil, right? Turns out it's not a good spoon and it's not a good fork. And so we don't want to build sporks. So that's him sort of leading into saying we don't want to run macOS on the iPad. And then he literally says, I don't think the iPad should run macOS, but I think the iPad can be inspired by elements of the Mac. I think the Mac can be inspired by elements of the iPad, and I think that's happened a great deal. So clearly they want to keep the platform separate to get you to buy both of them, but more so they want the Mac to be good at things the iPad isn't, and the iPad to be good at things that the Mac isn't, because that's what happens when you kind of have devices that sort of specialize in some ways. Not entirely, so they're kind of making them more comparable, but still they're giving them the unique qualities, which I, again, also admire. He also talks about the update, of course. That's the final category here. He says, we've been waiting for this day, referring to WWDC 2026 and the iPadOS 26 launch. He then says, we want to retain all the simplicity of the iPad, but still allow iPad users who want to go deeper and further to push it at their own pace to doing more, which is very exciting to hear. He also then says, and I think this is the best quote from the entire article, so we came to the point of saying, let's recognize that audience. They've self-identified in essence, right? And they have a set of expectations, and let's give them the tools to manage that world for themselves explicitly. So clearly they have heard us complain and groan and moan, and I'm very grateful for that, even though it took a long time. He then says, there are lots of things the two platforms can learn from one another, and that's where we've adapted our best ideas. So echoing that quote from a minute ago, he then goes on to say, figuring out what the right multitasking experience for this device and in all the ways that makes it unique has been something I think deserved more careful exploration. And I agree, they've tried a lot of different frameworks and methods and, just multitasking modes over the years, and this is clearly the best one yet. So it definitely took a lot of trial and error. He also said, he talks about the menu bar, if the iPad had a menu bar from the beginning like Mac did, app developers would naturally say, well, I think a lot of my functionality probably is only accessible via menu bar, right? With iPad, by creating an environment that had simplicity at its core, it meant the entire app ecosystem had all kinds of incredible design work done by so many developers to preserve the simplicity of that experience. That's really important because that's exactly what they did, or the philosophy they had with the iPhone. They didn't want to give it a QWERTY keyboard because they wanted developers to take advantage of that then huge 3.5-inch multi-touch display. They wanted interfaces to be unique, custom to each app's purpose, instead of having developers map, functions to different keys or keyboard shortcuts and all that. They wanted the device or the ecosystem to develop, around touch, around that simplicity. and not just make it a Mac as a tablet, because that's what other competitors were doing. You know, they had Windows XP on like a tablet computer, and did that sell? No. You know, Steve Jobs raved about how terrible they were, so they wanted those touch-based apps to exist first. So maybe they had this in mind all along, or maybe they had it, or they tried it, or they were prototypes. I'm sure, of course, there are, you know, Mac, iPad, you know, hybrid zombies in there somewhere at One Infinite Loop or at Apple Park. But, you know, they want, you know, touch-based, you know, interaction first, and I'm glad that they prioritize that. And the last quote that we have here, he says, "You make tough choices every year about where you prioritize and how you evolve. iPad didn't become what it is today in 1 year or even 5, and we're in it for the long haul." And last year, I wouldn't have believed that, but seeing this update and also taking into account the entire history lesson and just sort of everything said in this, you know, interview, it makes a lot of sense. The iPad is honestly one of their most elusive but also magical devices, you know, like it is sort of in between the Mac and the iPhone, and we don't really know, or we haven't known where it is, but now we kind of do. And of course, I hope we continue to find out with future updates and evolution, but it's my opinion that they sort of got over the biggest hurdle with this update, you know, sort of figuring out how windowing and multitasking works, how to adapt those features from the Mac while keeping the experience, you know, simple and very distinctly iPad. So with everything said, in this ginormous video, which has taken me weeks to produce, and I'm sure quite a while for you to watch through, even if you're skipping around, so thanks for tuning in and sticking with me here. This update, again, I would argue, reinvents the iPad in fundamental but really important ways that brings it closer to the Mac while also keeping it the iPad. And this update doesn't just bless the newer Pro and Air models. No, it brings a lot of these features, with the exception of like external monitor support, which, you know, I didn't expect to be brought to other models, to the iPad 11th gen, to the iPad mini even, which is so surprising. I did not expect the windowing mode to be present here, but it is, and the menu bar, so I'm so excited about that, to see how these different formats or versions of the iPad handle this update. And the 11th gen too, which is super affordable, so, you know, it just really makes this tablet, like, I think someone called it a monster at this point, which I totally agree with. It went from being sort of like a Fisher-Price toy, you know, or just an iPad. Now you can have multiple windows on it, and the menu bar and all that. So again, really excited to see how other models benefit from this, including really old models, not really old, sorry, but older models that I didn't expect to even get this update, like the, I gotta type in the password here. I have messed up this demo so many times, I'm not even gonna stop at this point. The iPad 9th gen and also the 8th gen here, which, you know, it's not as nice of an experience, but you still get the controls and the windowing and all that, and the menu bar. So if you have an older iPad, guess what? It does the same stuff, and the same can be said about the iPad Pro 2018 models, the 2020 models, the M1, the M2, other iPad Air models as well, so that is great. Anything, I think, with an A12 and up gets all of these features, with the exception of external monitor support again. So your iPad has been given a breath of fresh air, a breath of new life, whatever you want to call it. So all of us have been vindicated. You know, these features have not been gate-kept to newer iPads. If they were, that would have been very upsetting. So this is like a whole apology to people who really believed in the iPad for all these years. So if you have one in your drawer that you're not using as much, bring it out. You know, maybe you preserved your battery on it. You could be thankful about that, and you can get these amazing new features, specifically the windowing and the menu bar, which again, fundamentally change the iPad for the better. Anyway, I am so happy to inform you that about wraps things up here. I am like 2 to 2.5 hours into this, you know, demo slash outro multicam clip here. I haven't even drank water. I'm about to pass out. But this is a labor of love for a product that is so important to me and many of you, and this update that I think revolutionizes it or reinvents it. So hopefully I have conveyed that in a way that makes sense with the intro and the history recap and the demo and the questionnaire with Craig Federighi. Really important stuff there. Definitely read Federico Viticii's article. I have it linked below. So yeah, hopefully this all makes sense and that this video has lived up to the hype. Not that I really teased it. I've just been working on this nonstop and also working on my habits. You know, it's not the AM, it's the PM. I actually have a bedtime now, and you know, I actually split up my work more, so I'm not working into the middle of the night. I'm an unk now, I gotta go to bed. So anyway, that's another reason why this video took a while. So thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for tuning in. Lots of things are happening in the background. I got this office now. I'm just sort of getting myself situated to make even better content moving forward. So again, thank you so much for sticking with me since 6 years ago when my channel blew up with my video about iPadOS 13, which I think I posted on the same day, July 6, 2019, and today is July 6th, 2025. So that's super special if that's true. If it isn't, I'll put a little correction here. Doesn't matter, I'm not redoing this outro. Big shout out to Anchor for making this video possible and being very patient on the production side here with me. I'll leave everything of theirs linked in the video description down below. And of course, as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.